We wanted the Iron Hill dwarves to be a fairly well-trained army. We've seen individual dwarves, but this was an opportunity to see a real dwarf army go at it, and so we wanted to pull out all the stops and make it really cool.
The Iron Hill dwarves, if I was to describe them, were, in some ways, they were kind of the badasses. Even in the beginning of the first film, they were the guys that you called when things got real.
And what do the dwarves of the Iron Hill say? Is Dane with us?
Thorin is the flawed, passionate, driven young leader, whereas Dane's been there, he's done that, and he just keeps going.
Well, both Dain and Thorin have a distinguished war record. They both figured prominently at the Battle of Azanulbizar, which is the great battle between the orcs and the dwarves.
In the books, Azog actually dies in this battle. By doing it the way that Peter, Fran, and Philippa have, and keeping Azog alive, they've given Thorin a very, very personal nemesis.
And just for the sheer payoff of, you know, Thorin's character that we needed for Thorin to kill Azog. But as true fans of the books will know, that's not actually what happened.
In the books, it's actually Dain who attacks and actually kills Azog.
Up the steps after him leaped a dwarf with a red axe. It was Dain Ironfoot, Nain's son. Right before the doors, he caught Azog, and there he slew him and hewed off his head.
Dain, for a lot of us, was the grounded hero who you turn to. And the opportunity, I think, that a lot of us saw in the design department was that chance to designate him the quintessential powerhouse of a dwarf.
Unlike hobbits, Tolkien didn't invent dwarves. I think Tolkien lifted the dwarves from Norse mythology.
In the old Norse material he was drawing on, dwarves are not portrayed very favorably. Dwarves are associated with great works of craft, but also with curses, also with malice. And Tolkien adopted that fairly closely when he started writing about Middle-earth. So much so that there's a section where Tolkien writes that the dwarves do not have souls.
They're also said to be creatures of the stone. They come out of the stone, they go back into the stone. So actually, people don't know where dwarves come from. And one reason they might not know where dwarves come from is they never meet dwarf women. There is a belief that there aren't any.
One thing that seems to be going on is those early stories are very explicitly the story from the point of view of the elves. So the dwarves are portrayed universally in a negative manner. But that's not the case in The Hobbit, where we have a different perspective.
I know that dwarves can be obstinate and pig-headed and difficult, suspicious and secretive, with the worst manners you can possibly imagine, but they are also brave and kind, and loyal to a fault.
Tolkien reinvented the dwarves when he came to write The Hobbit, and he evolved a new background for them as he got into the appendices to The Lord of the Rings. We get to see the family tree. We know that Fili and Kili are the sons of Thorin's sister, Dis.
Now, if you've got a contradiction, Tolkien always wanted to explain it. How come people don't know where dwarves come from?
It's true you don't see many dwarf women. And in fact, they are so alike in voice and appearance that they're often mistaken for dwarf men.
It's the beards.
We wanted to show dwarf women mainly because the moment which you see in the Desolation of Smaug, where you see the bodies of those women holding their children, and to show that this was a real culture, not just a culture of blokes. So Richard Taylor and his incredible team at Weta Workshop came up with some beautiful drawings of dwarf women.
Nothing gave us more comedy than putting beards on our production women as we were trying to design the female dwarves.
I felt like a naughty school kid, because there I am sitting at my desk and, you know, there's one of my lady colleagues 10 feet away from me and I'm sitting there drawing, you know, a moustache on her face. I mean, it's like the kid at school who's drawing stuff on a picture of his teacher.
I love casting weird and wonderful, so casting bearded dwarfed women, how could that not be exciting? Don't you love ringing people up saying, how would you like to wear a beard today?
Having a beard is definitely interesting. I look like my dad, which is scary. Surprisingly, the number of women who wanted to play dwarves so they could wear facial hair was amazing.
Isn't it a stunner?
I'm not privileged to have a goatee, unfortunately.
It's okay, you're growing out the sideburns.
Yes, yeah, I've got the Elvis Presley thing going. Oh
yeah.
Even Kate said to me at one point, she said, I'd love to come and play a dwarf.
I'd seen all the dwarf beards, and I just fell in love with them. I said they were beautiful, and so I said to Peter, I want to come back and be a dwarf.
If you come back as a bearded dwarf lady, I'll be your husband.
It would be an honour, sir.
Well, we should do it. We should do it.
I want to wear one of those beards, and I want to be your wife, and we're going to sit there, and we're going to just in a passing shot, you and I are going to just eat a chicken leg.
Kate Blanchett gave us a photograph and said, please make me into a dwarf. And I took a run at that.
Obviously, to be a bearded dwarf in women, you have to be an open-minded performer. But what fun, embrace it. It's all part of the magic of Middle Earth.
That's how we do it in the hood.
I love the bearded ladies. The only kind I like.
It's the only kind you've got.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
They like hairy women. It's supposed to be attractive sexually, you know, so the more hair, the more attractive the woman. Isn't that right?
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
And also you need to play with the proportions with the women as well. You have to try and, well, highlight their stature, basically.
Have you seen the size of our assets? Yeah. I mean, look at those. That's something else the dwarf men like, a big asset.
No. You can tell the age of a female dwarf by the length of her chin bits. I'd say I'm about 27 years old. Yes, I ended up as a dwarf.
We're in a train of a couple of hundred dwarves, that's all that's left, with only 3 dwarf women. So that's all we've got left to populate the entire dwarf nation of the Blue Mountains, of which Tammy is one. So, see you later.
When the Lonely Mountain is destroyed, when Smaug comes and destroys the kingdom under the mountain, very few people escape. Thorin decides he'll start a new group, and he goes as far west as he can to the Blue Mountains. The other survivors went over to the Iron Hills as the closest dwarf colony.
In the Iron Hills, you have Thorin's contemporary, his cousin, Dane, who rules there.
And of course, since the dwarves take relationship very seriously, Dain, of course, he comes to the assistance of Thorin.
From the very outset, when we first sat with Peter and discussed Dane, he was adamant that Dane needed to have a unique and specific point of difference to all the other dwarves.
I wanted Dane to have this sort of flamboyant kind of mad Scottish kind of warrior type, you know. The Scots were fantastic in the real world history in taking on the British in the 1700s, where they just weren't going to take any crap from anyone. And casting Billy Connolly was fantastic because you have a guy who knows how to play a feisty Scotsman. I mean, he comes from that world. He comes from a tough upbringing. But you've also got a guy with a wonderful comic sense of humour as well.
Strangest offer I've ever had from Peter Jackson, and it said, would I like to do it? It's a small but important role of Dane Ironfoot. And I like his name right away, and he's a real hard man. And he really appealed to me, you know, this guy who comes out of the darkness, and everybody's quite in awe of him. Oh, no, it's him. He likes killing people. It appealed to my Glaswegian sort of side. There's a lot of us in Glasgow like that. But the bit I really liked was they sent me a page of dialogue, but I wasn't on it. I said, well, that's interesting. And then when I got here, they gave me a whole script, but it was for the first movie, the one I'm not in. And I thought, well, they worked pretty weird here. And Peter said, and have you read The Hobbit? I said, no. I said, not only haven't I read it, I don't like people who have. Because I come from the folk music bluegrass background before I did comedy and all that hippie 60s thing. And there was 2 distinct camps. There were Tolkien's and non-Tolkien's. And I was a non. And I didn't like the Tolkien people. People went around with this book under their arm talking about glibbity globbles and globalty glicks. And they always had long nails, those guys. It's another creepy thing I found about them.
To get to work with someone that is so filled with good humour can only bring great brightness to what can sometimes be a very challenging time.
Fairly early on, we found out that Billy Connolly was going to be cast as Dane, so we were all pretty excited. He's a big favourite with us.
The Scots came from Ireland for reasons best known to themselves, for Christ's sake. Come on, I know an even colder place. Right, it rains all the time. It's a fucking amazing. Head for the black cloud.
I certainly wanted to play a bit on the persona of Billy Connolly.
Dane hates most people. You know, he likes dwarves, and it kind of ends there. He has no time for elves. He finds them to be a bunch of Jessie boys, sort of mirror gazers. They seem to dress to look great, and he dresses to look terrifying.
He was pretty wild, a little bit crazy. And because at this stage we had been exploring animal motifs like the rams and boars, some of the initial ideas that I played with was this idea of giving his beard and hair design a slight boar look, shaping the beard into two kind of big tusk shapes and actually capping them with tusks. And also, wild boar often have that really spiny ridge of hair running down the back of them that makes them look, you know, a little bit sort of punk, but it also makes them look really aggressive.
And his armour. Ultimately, Peter knew from the very outset that his armour must never be ceremonial, but it did have to have a certain level of regal quality to it, but still be utterly functional. So this is Dane in his full armour.
That's good for the Iron Hills army. It feels like Iron Hills, doesn't it?
Yeah.
From an armour and weaponry point of view, Dane's armour was just much more elaborate, and obviously his helmet was more individual.
It's totally over the top. The huge boar's motif with the huge crest of bristled hair, it capped off a very sublime and beautiful piece of design.
Good morning.
Good day, my dear. Ooh. We've been spied upon today. Apart from just being Dane, I have to become a dwarf. I wear a cap on the back of my head. First, that goes on first. It makes my head generally bigger. Then the prosthetic face comes along.
Time for the face.
The transformation.
He has tattoos on his forehead and his cheeks. He has a big scar on the left side of his face and a broken nose. There's an old story they tell in Glasgow that sums him up. Glasgow was quite famous for violent guys, you know, and hard men. And the story goes, there's a guy in a bar, and a little guy, and he's with his friends, and he said, "Who's that guy up at the end of the bar?" And they said, "That's Big Jimmy, the hard man." Oh, he said, "Is that him?" He said, "I've always wanted to be a hard man." He said, "Well, you go and ask Jimmy, he'll tell you how to do it." So he goes up to Jimmy the hard man and he says, "Excuse me, you Jimmy the hard man?" He says, "Yeah, it's me." He said, "I've always fancied being a hard man myself, you know." I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Could you give me any advice?" He says, "Well, the best advice I give you is to always remember the old 1-3. Just keep that in mind, the old 1-3. And he says, "What happened to 2? He says, "Oh, you get that." And it's that thing that the hard man knows that it's actually 1, 2, 3. And real hard guys like Dane accept the 2. They know it's coming, so they carry the badges of it. Do you like my tusks?
I love them.
And he did have, in the end, the thickest, biggest wig and beard out of all the dwarves.
There's nothing worse than being a dwarf with a badly fitting hairpiece.
How embarrassing. What would the other dwarves think?
We had to pad his makeup time about 20 more minutes, half an hour longer than what it was, because he loves to tell stories and jokes.
As you can see, everybody's experts here.
Oh, please.
Everybody except me. I don't know anything. I don't have a script.
I know nothing.
I don't know what the show's about. Except that people are called Ginkle, Glonkel, Flinkel, Flonkel.
It's a romance.
You can't every day say, "Oh, my God, I have to get into this bloody thing again." It's a luxury you can't really afford because it's going to happen. So you might as well choose to enjoy it and have a good laugh with the people who are doing it. I'm ready for wardrobe. I saw an illustration first, but it was seconds before I started getting into my clothes. It was in my armour, you know, and I thought, I couldn't wait to get into it. Once I got into it, I couldn't wait to get out of it again. It was so heavy. There's this layer upon layer upon layer of armour and various bits and pieces. It makes me broader and broader. And then the people who made it came up to talk to me about it, and they said, how is it? And I said, it's like wearing a small European car. Richard Taylor, he says, well, actually, it's a lot of light layers, one on top of the other. I want to say, yeah, that's how heavy things happen. It isn't the lightness of the layer, it's the number of the layers, you know. Give me a break. I feel as if I'm inside a building. And they've built a brick toilet round me. 6 feet away, there was a full-length mirror, and I wandered over and I looked at myself and I thought, oh my God, this guy is going to terrify these people when he comes through the door.
Wow. Holy Mary, Mother of God. Beautiful.
Billy?
Hey, how are you? All right?
Nice to see you. How's it all feel?
Feels great.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Well, shall we shoot a bit of film? And look into the lens, lean in, and say, "I say we kill the bastard."
I say we kill the bastards.
Do we want to try one with a helmet on?
I cannot wait to kill the bastard who made this armour now.
Good. Okay, cool.
What am I doing?
Just stay down your belly. It's not here. It's there.
That's another thing. I had to learn to walk like a dwarf.
2 steps, square off. Boom. Yeah. Feel that?
Yes.
That's what you need to do.
I worked with Terry, and he was telling me how the elves are very elegant and swishy with the swords, but we are more the sort of, boof, of some of that. And we're low-slung, we've got a low centre of gravity, so you have to walk like it. You have to drop your stomach and move deadly, you know.
You've got to just have that depth and that no bullshit, no wavering. You've got to really be down.
But he said a great thing to me. He said, you got to listen with your back. Yeah, you don't turn around while you're walking. You just know, having crossed that path already, on your way to where you are, you know that behind you's okay. You have that sort of confidence thing.
Yes!
He's a very clever fellow. And so's Steve. And Steve teaches violence with such happiness and joy.
Would you buy that as a fight scene?
Oh, yeah. He'll tell you how to behead somebody with such joy, and you know he would show his daughter.
I was fortunate enough to train Billy for about 3 months. It's great because I would tell him something, and you could see the progression. He's going, yeah, okay, I get it, I get it. You can see you're actually connecting with the guy.
Can I do it once more?
Yes, you may. That's the spirit, Billy. Shoulders back, knees with your stomach.
And so I practiced and practiced, my belly sticking out and walking, and I walked up and down those hangers for days. And then I put the outfit on. It just drove me into the position, so I hadn't needed to practice at all. Caught while trying to walk.
So we're shooting our very first shot of Dane, Billy Connolly. He's riding a giant pig, where we've taken some warthog footage off the internet of warthogs trotting along, and we've programmed that movement into this barrel so that when Billy's on there, hopefully it'll move like a warthog would move, a big warthog. Going up.
Ladies' lingerie, porcelain dishes, and snuff boxes.
Okay, here we go. So let's just run them, and action.
Tell your friends they should leave, or I will water the ground with their blood.
That's fantastic. Good. We can cut.
Oh, it was hours on it. I couldn't get off.
You may have a few saddle sores tonight.
Stand me up. What?
Raw material from you.
Hey. Thank you. Your hips get slightly dislocated when in that position for such a long time. So when you go to get off, you say your legs don't work properly. So I had to be heaved bodily off this by about 4 or 5 guys. Actually, I could leap off of there like a gazelle. I just like to be touched by young men.
One of the things with Billy playing Dane is that his original appearance as Dane, the makeup was so heavy on him that, to me, I looked at this character and I didn't really see Billy Connolly. I mean, I didn't see him, and I wanted to see him.
Do you think that if you walked down the street like that people would recognise you?
I wouldn't recognise me.
I realised it was a situation a bit like what we had with Thorin originally, with Richard, and we had it with Aidan playing Kelly, and we had it with Jimmy playing Beaufort, is that we've taken away what is so great about their facial performance by burying them in the makeup. And so we were able to redesign their makeup midway through the filming, in actual fact. And we had a very similar situation with Billy Connolly. He was swamped in the makeup of Dane.
So it came back to us for a round of redesigning, where the brief was specifically pull more of Billy through the design so that it resembled Billy a little more.
In the original prosthetic, he's got a bit of a broken nose from an earlier battle and things, and so Pete did want to keep that in there. Not quite so long and quite so wide.
We tried kind of making it more like Billy's nose, but that wasn't quite right either. So every day, Peter would be shown a different kind of variation, and he would look at it and say, no, it's not quite there. It should have a kind of more of a kind of pronounced bridge.
I remember he looked over at John Howe and said, let's use John's nose. He's got the perfect nose for this. And so John did a sketch, using his nose. It was pretty funny.
Essentially, it's another one of John's major contributions to this film. In all the artwork that John has done of anything involving the dwarves, he's made one of them, if not all of them, actually, look like himself in the troupe. He just likes to join in.
So there's a little bit of John Howe in Dane.
Gandalf the Grey. Tell this rabble to leave, or I'll water the ground with their blood.
Peter liked the notion that Dane would have a mount that was specific to him, and so Dane ended up with the boar to ride on.
These are creatures that are tenacious, low to the ground, stubborn. They have attributes that are so complementary of the dwarves of Tolkien's mythology.
But yeah, it was fun to explore. I mean, I think I did some designs looking at sort of warthogs a lot with something with a much longer nose. Peter wanted us to explore all manner of things and go pretty wild with them.
Peter decided on a pig, and his reference was one of these New Zealand pigs, a kuni.
We first met Pikelet when she came along to one of our casting calls that we did across the country.
Yeah.
And we noticed her straight away, didn't we?
Oh, there was something about her that just stood out.
Yeah, she just had that X factor.
For those of you not from New Zealand, a pikelet is essentially a smaller, thicker pancake.
You don't get a figure like mine without eating pikelets, and they're a great and favourite part of the New Zealand diet. Perfect name for a little pig.
They can be house-trained.
You won't be house-training them. We put her in one of the Lake Town scenes, and we never realised where that was going to take her.
It's like she was born to act. And I got to tell you, it creates a lot of jealousy amongst the other actors. I mean, they're not happy about the fact that she steals the film.
Now she's demanding her own trailer. I mean, that's crazy.
Good deal.
Peter gets muffins, I get nothing. Muffins for the pig, nothing for me.
I wanted Pikelet to be the animal that Dane himself rides. She's a huge, I mean, she's almost the size of a cow, you know, with short legs.
Peter walked him into the office just to show Fran once, walked him through the office, this giant pig.
What sort of pig is Pikelet?
A cooney.
A cooney. Wow.
You even got papers.
You've got papers? Where are your eyes? They're buried beneath your ears.
I'll see you this afternoon. See you this afternoon.
We adopted Pikelet, and she lives with us now. We have Pikelet in a very comfortable field, and she's well cared for and a very happy old lady now.
What a life that pig must have now. Private jets, three-course dinners.
So Dane is riding a cooney pig who is based on our pet pig, Pikelet.
I mean, that kind of makes me laugh.
Dane, he looks completely silly on his pig, but he doesn't for a second think he's silly, and nor should anyone else dare to laugh or smile. That just brought a spirit into the whole character.
I wouldn't like to come in front of old Dane. Yeah, he's not to be messed with.
His fighting style was, let's say, we'd call it pub-style fighting, headbutts. Here was a rough brawler. As a warrior, he was far superior than a lot of the other dwarfs, and that's what made him a leader as well.
He is a truly wise and noble king. In fact, it would have been great to tell the rest of Dane's story.
We are told at the time of The Lord of the Rings that Sauron has sent a messenger to Dane, offering him one of the dwarven rings in exchange for news about Bilbo, who Bilbo is and where he can be found.
Sauron was trying to bribe and corrupt the dwarves, as he did the knight. Dane, being the man he is, or the dwarf he is, stout of heart, snubbed his nose and told him in no uncertain terms that the dwarves were not for sale, and they will never be slaves.
In The Lord of the Rings, we saw Sauron attack Minas Tirith. Then we saw Gandalf and Aragorn leading the defense of the south. But what we didn't see is that Dane and Bard's descendant, his grandson, Brand, they actually hold off an army sent by Sauron to take that whole northern area.
We hear reference to Dane defending Erebor against Sauron in The Lord of the Rings.
I wish I could muster a legion of dwarves, fully armed and filthy.
Your kinsmen may have no need to right a war. I fear war already marches on their own lands.
King Brand and King Dane are actually fought all the way back to the doors of Erebor. It's a pitched battle.
Gandalf in the appendices says, never forget the courage of those who fought in that battle. Because the orcs would have swept through the north and destroyed even places like Rivendell and Lothlorien.
And in the kind of saga tradition, Gandalf says, Dain dies like a hero, axe in hand, fighting to the last.
I should call that a heavy loss, if it was not a wonder, rather, that in his great age he could still wield his axe as mightily as they say he did. Standing over the body of King Brand before the gate of Erebor until the darkness fell.
The two of them fight off Sauron's forces in the north, and they actually die side by side, but successfully. They defeat Sauron's
Oh,
forces.
yeah. God, you sound like those guys, I remember. I remember they would give me these big, long stories, and I would be thinking, I wish you would go away. Followed by diddly 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 diddly. Gandalf, get a life. Diddle-dee, 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 diddle-dee.
Good spot, huh, Pete?
Very good. You could put hobbit holes into those, and maybe the party field then is, you know, just over the back there.
When I first started working on Lord of the Rings, I told a chap who was a Lord of the Rings fanatic, and the first thing he said to me was, "Don't do it, don't do it, you're going to destroy my world." And I suddenly had this realisation that whatever we did was going to affect millions of people.
Tolkien's novels, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, they're like the tip of an iceberg in the sense that this man spent more than half a century elaborating the languages, the peoples, and the histories, and creating this coherent, parallel, imaginary world.
There is tremendous responsibility then as the people charged with bringing Tolkien's literature and making it into visual art, that you've got to honour it so carefully.
From the very beginning, Peter said, "I love these books, and there are no shortcuts."
This is probably where we could stick the big statues down there somewhere, the Argonaut.
It's got to be right or not at all.
It is quite remarkable and telling that Peter Jackson should have gone to the two most successful Tolkien artists, Alan Lee and John Howe, so that when people see the film, they say, "This is the Middle-earth I would always have pictured. This is the Gandalf that I'd always seen as I was reading the books." No, wasn't. This is the Gandalf you recognize from John Howe's and Alan Lee's pictures in their illustrations for the books which precede the film.
That bag end is designed after a John Howe painting. And it's a famous painting of Gandalf with that tree on the hilltop. So when we saw that, it's like, oh, that's Bag End. Of course it is.
We can credit a lot of other crew members, a lot of other creative people that obviously have contributed. But if you said what are the two names you would say are the most influential in terms of the look of these movies, there'd be nobody that would disagree. It would be Alan and John. They are the heartbeat of these films.
Everyone who's involved in these films, I think, feels that even if they're just painting fruit or they're making a spoon or they're making a dagger or an axe, they're investing it with story as well as their own kind of skills and craft.
This is a brand new sting. It's not the same sword as we used in Lord of the Rings, which has some elven runes down the blade. They're a gift from the elves from Rivendell when he returns between the two stories.
John and I both started this journey through the filmed version of Middle-earth in 1998.
Alan, you're always welcome on our set. Oh. Or your set, more to the point.
Working our way through the Lord of the Rings and then subsequently through The Hobbit. We both did it almost as an explorer, following the stories of our heroes through the book.
You might even make a parallel between what Alan and I did on this project and that sense of Bilbo traveling beyond the lands that he knew. We started out at home in Hobbiton, something we knew quite well, and then headed out into territory that we'd really never been before. I feel quite strongly about this whole notion of this imaginary journey running in parallel to your design process, even if it's just in sketchbooks and not on foot. And then by the time you get to Dale, it's like any place you haven't been. And you see it from a distance, and you've got a bit of an idea of what it's like, you know, a rough sketch. And as we get closer, we're able to elaborate. And then you realize that Bilbo's gone very, very far east for somebody with such short legs.
They could see in the wide valley shadowed by the mountain's arms, the grey ruins of ancient houses, towers, and walls. There lies all that is left of Dale.
Dale is possibly one instance where Tolkien doesn't provide very much information.
It's just a group of ruins that they pass on their way through to the Lonely Mountain. But there's not a lot of exposition on Dale itself as a culture. And so you start thinking about how it functions, what life would have been like there in its heyday.
I always felt that Dale was a place that the dwarves would take their merchandise and their goods to trade with because they didn't like direct contact with the elves. So we were using Dale as the sort of marketplace.
It's where all of the trade from the mountain came and went. All of the gold that came down out of the mountain, the stuff that we were mining came there and we traded.
Dale was the garden city of Middle-earth, really, and was a source of food for Erebor.
We were looking at a city of people who are well-cultured. They can afford the luxuries of fine silks and beautiful jewellery. You can kind of see how a culture like that and somewhere like Pompeii that we're familiar with share some common ground in that they have no worries. It was a land of plenty and a time of peace.
That was essentially where we were coming from, was to create a place that had a rich history and that, you know, tragedy had struck.
You know, you need something to anchor your design concepts. So Peter's idea was that in Tolkien's world, they're travelling east. So in the period when Tolkien wrote this, travelling east would have been across Europe and into Asia. So that became our guiding design influence, that once you're over the Misty Mountains, you're actually into, you know, outer Mongolia, and then you sort of get influenced by things like Tibet.
We're creating a kind of a mountain village or town, so we did look at areas where they would be building at high altitudes. We drew inspiration from some of the monasteries built on quite kind of rocky outcrops with gorges, and then all contained in a defensive wall.
There's an initial structure to all these buildings of stone, and then everything else is actually made of wood. So we ended up with all these projecting balconies like you get in places like Bhutan, Nepal.
But we didn't want to make it look too kind of obviously or oriental, or draw too strongly from a place that we would recognise. So went to towns in Italy, mountain villages.
The terrain literally dictates, you know, how the architecture ends up looking.
We wanted to get in steep streets and a kind of tight labyrinthine feel that you get in hill towns.
If you take the actual architecture of Dale, it's almost as if you had an Italian hill town built by the Tibetans.
This is all good stuff. I mean, it's good stuff. I like all the little nooks and crannies. And,
yeah, there's a few different areas to run through. And, you know, we built our model of Dale and we talked to Peter about what we were going to shoot, where he was going to shoot, which way he was going to shoot.
They're a very handy tool for Peter and Dan and anyone who can see the models of what you're going to get on the day, because you can get your head down inside the little buildings and see camera angles, see where lights need to go. You can even choreograph action all through this.
We created a replica of the location that we were going to use. It was constantly kind of revealing itself to you, turn a corner and you see a different aspect of it. So it actually felt a lot larger than it was.
Dale's probably one of our biggest sets, and it was too big to fit in the back lot. So we built the city of Dale up at Mount Crawford, which is up on the Miramar Peninsula, and it's about a 10-minute drive from Stone Street.
Of course, Dale isn't the first time we've been to Mount Crawford. We had Skull Island built there in the natives village for King Kong.
You could build so much of a practical city up there and then have the clear skyline, you know, behind you. So it served us well in the past.
We're up at Mount Crawford. This is day one. And we're going to have 100-odd men up here and be powering through it 24 hours a day. It's going to be everyone on the rock face, everyone working. City of Dale set. It's got 44 buildings in it, and it's quite tall. So the degree of difficulty is quite high.
Dale is by far the most impressive set I've ever shot on, to be honest. It was sort of on the level with the Minas Tirith set.
We shoot Dale twice, and this colour map is made so that we know which part we're building when. Now, all the pink is basically Dale pre-Smorg, and that's what we have to build first. We then basically have 3 weeks to turn the whole location around to be post-Smorg Dale.
It's a pretty old city, as you can see. We've got to make it look like it's been here a long time. So we've got to break our tiles and really shape it, crack them, lend a bit of authenticity to the whole thing.
You appeared to be walking on cobbled streets. These walls appeared to have been there for centuries. The flowers appeared to be real. They were real.
Dale was never a set that the Greens Department were going to be part of. Out of the blue, it got sort of changed and called to the Orchard City. Then we became part of it.
So what Dale we wanted to represent was the pure beauty of the natural world, the bounty of nature, the great orchards full of blossom, a sense of plenty, because then when it becomes a desolation and nothing grows there anymore, you've truly lost something.
And then suddenly, once Philippa sort of talked about, well, this was the Garden City, we tried to work out what things you could grow in that sort of environment and then added that to the set.
So we're coming to the end of summer here in New Zealand, and trying to find enough fruiting plants for the so-called Orchard City now is proving to be a problem. We're using artificial trees and we're putting real fruit on the artificial trees. We're using real trees and we're putting artificial fruit on the real trees.
Real lime tree, fake limes.
We've got about 16,000 sprays of artificial foliage, 3,500 apples, 2,000 pears, there's about 500 lemons, a couple of hundred persimmons, and there's 14,000 mulberries we've made.
So the foliage is bought from China and it's a mulberry foliage, and then we handmade all the mulberries with glue and beads.
The notion of it being an orchard village came about this whole other amazing architectural aesthetic that was neither Tibetan or Venetian, it was Dale.
So this is a little bit like a vacation, because usually we're chained to our desks. But this afternoon we slipped our shackles and taking a little touristy walk around Dale.
Okay, did you get the keys for the chalet?
Yeah. No, I thought you had them.
Did you pick up the sheets from reception?
No, I thought you had all that.
No, I thought you were doing it.
No,
honestly,
no.
John. No, not going holiday with you again.
One of the interesting things about John and Alan was they worked together in the same room for all of Lord of the Rings, and then another room for all of The Hobbit.
It's not bad. Do you reckon we can get two in there?
John and Alan have been part of it right from the beginning and are lovingly referred to as the Tolkien twins, I think, because they're always together, but they're so different.
It's a little bit like the the hare and the tortoise. He had a tremendous amount of kind of nervous energy, and I quite enjoyed my solitude and quietness.
I'm more of a morning person, Alan's more of a night owl. So the last person leaving Weta would probably be Alan, and the first person arriving would probably be me.
Another thing with John is that he has to deal with everything immediately. So if he gets an email, he will answer it immediately. I tend to put things off a little bit.
A long time ago, when I was in, I guess, just finished high school, I wrote a letter to Alan. Dear Mr. Alan Lee, I very much admire your work. Probably asking for some kind of advice.
Unfortunately, I didn't reply. Not because I didn't wish to, but I just, I tend to lose letters.
And he hasn't replied yet. He's promised me a reply, which I hope one day I'll receive.
Which he keeps reminding me about.
Alan often thinks he'll reply, and he's kind of replied in his mind, but he hasn't really replied for real.
Sometimes you would wonder if Alan actually knew which day it was.
So now it's July 19...
See,
That's a good start.
1985.
Apart, he would always know because, you know, Wednesday night is tango.
I have one extracurricular activity that kind of takes me totally out of my work frame of mind. I do Argentinian tango. I think that's kept me sane, actually, over the last 4 years being here.
He's such a gentleman, you know, of a bygone era. And the tango definitely works for him.
John needs to go out running every day. At lunchtime, he'll sort of charge off and run around the coastline of Miramar. Often with a troop of others that he's recruited from the ranks of Weta Digital, sort of panting in his wake.
And he's going out, you know, on the weekends and does these, you know, massive hikes. And I told him, I said, John, I said, do you go out with anybody? He goes, no, it's just me. I said, well, do you let anybody know where you're going? Because, you know, people get lost, trip and fall, and we're going to lose John Howe.
Alan and I, there's certainly not two copies of the same person, I hope. Although, after spending years and years together, I'm sure some may have rubbed off.
It occurred to me that John, he was so different from me that it was almost as if we were merged into one. We'd be one kind of completely kind of normal human being.
People already call me Alan and you John. It's going to get worse.
People do make that mistake.
I'm still waiting, Alan. Waiting for that letter. I'll send you my address again, just so if you wish to reply, make sure I get it. I believe that there's a film crew shooting something in this town. Yeah. It must be a documentary.
I recognize Andy Serkis.
Is that Andy? Is that Andy Serkis? Yeah. Really? Yeah. I'd love to get an autograph.
I'll give you one.
Okay, deal. I'll settle for that.
Give me a D! Give me an A! Give me an L! Give me an E! Put it together and what do you got? Yeah, well, let's see it then. Come on!
Basically, our job is to tell the whole story of prosperous and happy Dale, and then its sudden destruction by Smorg, all in about 20 seconds or less.
Put me in costume, I'll just ride the carousel all day. It'd be lovely.
It's one of the ironies of filmmaking that a lot of work goes into something that might last on screen for only a short amount of time. The art department spends weeks, if not months, creating this masterpiece, and we try and do it justice.
We try and impart on a place like Dale the character of the people who live here.
So to do that, you need detail. You know, you need all those little things that mean something, that tells you this is a fantastic place, it's a beautiful place, the people are all happy, they're all fed, it's all good here.
Finest quality, handmade toys.
The toy market of Dale was the wonder of the North.
It was a key dressing pointer for us to create the toy market theme in the set somewhere. We had quite a bit of space to do it, so we filled the central courtyard with wooden toys. And there were kites and fabulous things for younger children.
The thing about this city is that there are so many different little nooks and crannies that if you were here for 3 months filming it, you probably wouldn't see everything. Like, there's frescoes in the strangest places.
And our potter made close to 8,000 little individual tiles that were beautifully laid on the set.
It was very good for me to see it in its heyday, so that I had some sort of memory of something beautiful and the stories I'd heard about Dale in my head, and it really did look fantastic.
And it was just like walking around this Tuscan village on a hillside. There was a working merry-go-round that my daughter went on, and it was all just delightful.
So I think the restaurant I reserved is over that way, but I'm not sure. Yeah, we'll check that side.
If you kind of switched part of your mind off that knew you were in a movie, it was like you had stumbled across some weird ancient European civilization in New Zealand. It was kind of strange.
Please imagine these ramparts overlooking the amazing vista towards Erebor, not a green screen, a pine forest, and Greater Wellington.
It was weird. Up on the parapets, you could get right up and look down over the set of Dale, which is this old Eastern European really, really amazing place. And then you turn around and you look out towards Wellington Harbour and there's this modern metropolis of Wellington City just across the harbour.
And what's hilarious is these planes were coming into land. So if you were on the left-hand side of the plane and you had good eyesight, you'd wonder what the hell was being built up there, because it looked like a medieval town was being built on the top of this Mount Crawford.
You can't describe what it's like to be in a place like that, because it doesn't happen very often.
And that's the sad thing, is that, I mean, I would just love to come and do more and more days up here. But that's it, that's the thing. The next time you see it, it'll be absolutely razed to the ground. Everything will be burnt. There won't be any of this feeling of it being this living orchard, this, you know, this market garden centre of Middle-earth. I have to say, though, it's the sort of place that you really would want to come on holiday to, in this state.
And suddenly we're in a different world.
We're in a very different world. It's not exactly a vacation spot anymore, is it?
You'd think it would be heartbreaking to have to go and destroy really good work, but you're still actually creating. The act of destruction was kind of quite satisfying in a strange sort of way.
We're burning material to make it look like Smaug the dragon's been through and destroying the place, so it's dragon damage detail. Seriously though, you've got to try and make it look like something. It's got to be burnt enough to be burnt, but still look like it's actually an object.
And then we go and put it back in the window frame.
We talked about where else in the world this sort of devastation has happened, you know. A lot of it relating to firebombing, you know, Dresden, everything that could burn burnt, but the stonework was left.
So what we're looking at with these buildings is there's various fireballs have actually gone through the roofs of these buildings, and then basically the buildings have burnt from the inside out.
As we were doing our research for a ruined city, one of them is Stalingrad, and there was this fantastic photograph I saw of a bronze statue of children dancing, and it's slightly bent and slightly melted. I got this huge feeling of sorrow and tragedy, and the statue was so evocative that we used that as an influence for the whole carousel merry-go-round element.
The other place that comes to mind with this is Chernobyl, and how it's just been untouched now for 25 years, and everyone just left. Everyone ran from Chernobyl when the reactor exploded.
People had no time to collect their belongings or anything. They had just fled and let nature take over again.
I really just wanted to capture that feeling. One day everything was happy, and then within minutes it was destroyed, and that's how it had been for years.
Happy place full of laughter. It was beautiful before. It's an amazing job, amazing. But as Peter says, this is what happens when you let a film crew into your house. So, brilliant.
I thought it might be quite good is that you guys take a beat here, and some of you could just walk into here, looking around, and look into the doorways, look at kind of just for a beat or two,
We shot a few sequences of the dwarves arriving at Dale, so it was like the first lot sort of walking through and seeing what had happened, and the reveal of the dead inhabitants of Dale.
And all around you'll see the charred bodies of actors who haven't quite made the grade on the film.
A lot of influence and reference for Dale was Pompeii. So we had these bodies that had been burnt and frozen in time, and we really wanted to capture that feeling that people were mid-movement when they died. There was a foreground shot of one of these characters completely incinerated but cradling her child in the foreground. And we sort of shot past that and onto Martin as he walked past and he saw them.
It was just awful. You'd see charred children's toys and, evidence of what had been a bustling, sort of lovely village life. And it looked like it had been blitzed. I mean, it looked awful.
Dale was nice when it was beautiful. It looked very, very pretty. But I kind of preferred it when we trashed it, I have to say. That was the Dale I preferred, the creepy kind of spooky one.
I think the set finishers and, everyone involved really has just done a fantastic job on this set.
Even enormous sets, like the set of Dale, which was a huge set as far as sets go, is actually a very tiny little section of Dale itself.
We did have to create a digital Dale in which we could locate our main kind of courtyard set and the Great Hall.
One of the sort of starting points for us was that Alan Lee did this sort of map of Dale.
Kind of starting off with our set right in the middle. He actually drew the roads and main kind of blocks of housing.
And with that, we were able to then break that map down and figure out where action played within that map.
We needed to very quickly build this entire area, and so I sat down with Alan Lee and we took 1 week and we built all of Dale and the surrounding valley, including this little bit of Ravenhill and the whole Erebor Gate.
If you look at this particular shot here, we're just going through and we're finding specific areas within the city that we can set things up. Now, some of these are based on the live-action set, so we're using the live-action set for the models and whatnot. And then we want to be able to see Erebor from here. We want to be able to see Ravenhill from this section. And from that, we go through and start, figuring out like where these live-action plates are going to live within the set.
So the layout model would be quite kind of simple, and then we would provide more detailed drawings, and each building would be individually modeled.
We sort of built maybe, 24, 25 hero buildings that you could sort of turn, kind of like what they would do, again, on set. If you turn it this way, the facade's slightly different, it's stained differently, so you can have a lot of reuse out of them, and you sort of use it to populate the whole city, so it seems quite a lot larger than it actually is.
It was actually a very successful CG model. It's one of the things I was most pleased with, really. But then Dale was quite an amazing experience, remarkable set, where you can imagine yourself in a totally far-flung part of the world in a different time.
I've never seen anything like it. And I've worked on good things, and I've worked on things with fantastic sets, and nothing has surpassed what Dan and his whole army did, you know.
And all the time, the actor could put on the side of his script, NAR, no acting required, because there it was. We didn't have to act where we were. It was absolutely believable.
Dol Guldur. A dark power dwells in there, such as I have never felt before. It is the shadow of an ancient horror, one that can summon the spirits of the dead.
Dol Guldur, translated, means the hill of sorcery. It's a fountain of evil.
Dol Guldur, there was a danger on that set. I mean, it was full of violence and horrible, and there was underground passageways overgrown with hanging skeletons and black blood everywhere, I seem to remember, and not pleasant at all.
The evil that spreads across Middle-earth seems to be emanating from that place.
The necromancer is up to things in Dol Guldur, and he corrupts the greenwood, changing the greenwood to the murkwood. So this healthy forest becomes a dangerous forest.
Gandalf in The Hobbit is pretty central to the story, but he's not there all the time. He sets up the journey that the dwarves and the Hobbit go on, and then he's often away doing other business, and quite what that is not revealed in the novels.
You're not leaving us.
I would not do this unless I had to. So Peter's promise was that we would, in the films, get to see what Gandalf was up to when he wasn't on the journey.
It appeared that Gandalf had been to a great council of the White Wizards, masters of law and good magic, and that they had at last driven the necromancer from his dark hold in the south of Mirkwood.
When Tolkien was writing The Hobbit, the stronghold of the necromancer, he wasn't named, but in The Lord of the Rings we find out it's Dol Guldur, the hill of sorcery.
What is it? It's
an old Numenorian-era fortress that has been taken over. Fortress that's gone to ruin, gone to wreck and ruin, and been taken over by something very evil in the last few hundred years.
The Numenorians, they were a race of high men, an ancient human civilization that was a little bit of a riff off the Atlantis myth. This incredibly sophisticated, powerful culture exerting a huge influence on the world, but ultimately falls.
Many of the oldest structures of Middle-earth were originally Numenorian, very, very ancient strongholds and cities.
So they built a number of sort of architectural marvels like Minas Tirith, Orthanc, Cirith Ungol, Minas Ithil. Though the interesting thing is that Minas Ithil and the Black Gate were originally built to protect their kingdom from Sauron. The irony is that Sauron eventually takes them over and repurposes them, and it's this concept that Peter runs with Dol Guldur.
It'd be quite normal, in a way, for Dol Guldur to be an abandoned fortress that the Numenorians leave behind, because we have places like that up and down the river. Like the Argonath, which has the enormous statues there of the old kings. Well, perhaps further up the river there was a Numenorian outpost which could be taken over. One reason why Sauron takes an interest in it is because it's near the Gladden Fields. And he knows that is where Isildur lost the ring.
And Sauron was so obsessed with the ring that he wanted to be close by the river where the ring had been lost, so he could keep an eye on that location and obviously search for it himself. And also a place where he could hide away. A place of secrecy and kind of overgrown by trees. So as far as anyone else knew, it was a completely abandoned fortress.
From here, it seems no more than a ruin, but it looks completely abandoned.
As it is meant to.
Peter's idea was to have it growing up out of the forest so that you could actually almost arrive in it without realizing that you're in a building, because you're still amongst the trunks of the trees in the forest.
Because it's on the side of a hill, the forest sort of follows the contours of a hill, so they could enter it and then they go in a door and they come through a door and come down. As you come down, you're into even a more subterranean area where all the trees are.
This idea didn't play right through into the finished result because you don't get amazing wide shots if your castle's entirely submerged in forest.
Like everything that we've ever done in these Tolkien movies, we've always tried to make a key location, such as Dol Guldur, and make it quite visually distinctive. I always want to start with a silhouette that's distinctive, so it's memorable, and that you can immediately look at different silhouettes of different locations throughout the film, and if you've seen the movie once, you can go back and identify which each of these is supposed to be. And so the silhouette of Dol Guldur, we wanted it to be a remnant of what it originally was. You know, it's like it was once a fortress on a hill, and it's a kind of eroded away. The whole chunk of the hill has kind of collapsed, and trees have grown up in amongst all the ruins, and so we're trying to get that horror. It's like something that's decomposed at the back, and you don't realise it is till you go around the back.
It's so decayed and rotten. It's that analogy of it's like a rotten tooth. It's deeply diseased as an environment. So not the sort of place you want to hang around, really.
It's like a bee's nest or a wasp nest that's had the side taken off it, you know, so you can see inside this huge castle that has a grim past.
From a design point of view, looked at Piranesi. Piranesi was a 18th century artist who produced a series of fantasy drawings of crumbling ruins and dungeons, which were really quite striking. They're very kind of vertiginous, lots of staircases and weird structures. So some of the first drawings were quite in that spirit, and a little bit of the spirit of M.C. Escher as well. These labyrinthine structures. It's almost as if it's built to kind of mystify anybody who kind of wanders in there.
Another influence on Dol Guldur would be what the 19th century did with the worst of its neo-Gothic architecture, where it had abandoned any pretense of the originality that the medieval period contained and recreated a sort of industrial Gothic with this kind of lack of humanity and, you know, sort of suffocating and uncomfortable. It's basically a big haunted house.
It's not true Gothic in any sense, but fantasy Gothic, it definitely is going down that track.
What I would suggest we do is we start just banking bits of Dol Guldur, because Dol Guldur we need a lot of different bits and pieces, because I think we'd be better off to say, okay, if this is a stairs, we'll have that in one corner of the set, and now we'll build this and this, so that everything acts as a shoot-off for each other.
It's always very satisfying when the bits that you've hinted at in a concept drawing end up being translated into a set. And here you can just sort of walk around in the middle of it. It's all around you.
Yeah, and this was quite an amazing set in the way that it came together, because it had to be assembled in a matter of days. Everything was just pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle.
So one of the really early concept principles for this set, and for the whole of Dol Guldur really, was that it would have a very strong triangular influence. I think the angles, you know, they have a sort of dynamic, it's an evil dynamic. I'm not saying triangles are evil, but they sort of nurture a feeling of discomfort, which is where we were trying to go.
It's probably its closest comparison will be with Cirith Ungol in The Return of the King. And that's a similar use of angles and these kind of strong triangular doorways.
Yeah, that sort of oppressiveness comes from the fact that everything is leaning in on top of you, but it's been built that way. Yeah. And you're trapped, in a sense. You're in it, and you're not quite going to get out.
Dol Guldur is uncomfortable spiritually and uncomfortable physically. It's been strapped back together with old bits of iron hammered into the stone.
The theme of these iron bands, which we imagine basically hold a lot of the structure together, is another discomfort, if you like, in the architecture itself, because the addition of iron on stone is never a happy one, because the iron and the stone just don't go well together. It's like putting a dirty bandage on something.
It's also forming these little kind of cages in which people are imprisoned and just left to kind of rot down, really. The other element that we put into most of the sets were evidence of torture and chains and shackles and all that kind of thing. So I'm not too proud of myself with this, but this is a little kind of device I invented. It's really just an unspecific kind of torture chamber device, which I don't want to think about too much. I just made it look as kind of creepy as possible.
Alan's quite a creepy. You wouldn't know it. You know, debonair, soft-spoken, well-educated, but welcome to Alan's dark side.
Dol Guldur was essentially an architectural manifestation of the character who inhabited it.
Peter did mention, it is Sauron. It's his decorating style, slightly eclectic, but sort of Middle-earth sort of evil, I guess.
Everyone loves this time of year, don't they? When they hang their corpses up in the cellar.
What I didn't imagine when drawing it was just quite how dressed out with all this creepy stuff it was going to be. To me, it was just spikes and vines and architecture. So all this stuff is really nothing to do with me. It's a great bonus to have very imaginative set dresses. It's great.
Too many mistakes. Too many mistakes, and that's what happens. They become set dressing.
One of the camera guys came up to me one day and said, "What's the deal with Dol Guldur? Is there does Sauron have a caretaker that just spends his day hammering skulls to the walls?" Because who else does it? Sauron obviously doesn't. He's not that guy. So what we figured is, there's like this macabre caretaker.
There is definitely a feeling of threat and evil and things you don't want to touch.
We conjectured that there may well have been a Palantir in there.
There was a story point at one point in the scripts where we needed to give Gandalf a sense of urgency to get to the mountain. That involved the mechanic of a Palantir.
The Palantir, which, obviously features really strongly in Lord of the Rings, they are a communication device.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
And very ancient in origin. There's a handful of them left in the old Númenórean strongholds, like Minas Tirith, Minas Ithil, and Dol Guldur, potentially.
I recall Gandalf was intended to touch the Palantir, and he would get visions of what might come to pass if he didn't act quickly.
And the vision that he would see was Smaug leading armies into battle for Sauron. Legions of orcs, super cool stuff, real end-of-the-world stuff. Just hell on earth.
Gandalf in the appendices tells the story of the Hobbit from his point of view, about how he was concerned that Smaug and Sauron could form an alliance and that the dragon could be devastating.
In the end, we realized we didn't need it, and so I think it's left there for keen-eyed fans to spot.
The courtyard of Dol Guldur has 9 staircases. Did they ever shoot up here? No, nobody's allowed to climb up there, John.
Really?
Because if you climb up, you can't get down.
Yeah, I know. I came down the other day, working my way down. It's really uncomfortable.
You always have to compromise between the ability to use a staircase and how evil and difficult you can make it look, you know. And a staircase has, you know, a proportion of tread to a riser that makes it comfortable for humans. But if you sort of beef those proportions up a bit, you change them round a bit, you can make it look very uncomfortable.
Most dangerous steps in the world.
They are indeed. You get sort of harness. It wasn't easy, and walking down was even harder.
On each of the 3 sides, we have these 3 bays with the 3 staircases, which adds up to 9. So each of the ring wraiths has an allotted little kind of cubby hole at the top of those staircases.
9 for mortal men doomed to die.
We knew that around this time, as Sauron was growing in strength and, in fact, inhabited Dol Guldur, that his greatest servants, the ring wraiths, were there as well.
The ring wraiths are very much associated with that look of the black cowled figures in the Fellowship of the Ring. As Saruman says, the 9 have now taken the form of riders in black.
The 9. They crossed the River Eisen on Midsummer's Eve, disguised as riders in black.
Which means that they basically just chucked a bit of whole black cloth over their bodies. What we're getting to see in The Hobbit is what they're like without the bit of black cloth thrown over their bodies.
The ring wraiths were 9 kings of men who were given the gift of magic rings by Sauron. And through these rings, they gained certain powers, but they also gave up a piece of themselves.
Now they are slaves to his will. They are the Nazgul, ring wraiths, neither living nor dead.
In Dol Guldur, we had a chance to see these guys, and not just see them as we had done before as either robed figures or the White Kings, but to see them in their armor.
The designs of the ring wraiths are meant to reflect their origins, and their origins span much of Middle-earth, especially those parts which we don't get to visit in Lord of the Rings or in The Hobbit.
In the Return of the King, we do see the Witch King with his armored helmet, but rather than have 9 clones, we wanted to create 8 other sets of armor.
In fact, Tolkien named only 2 of his wraiths. There was the Witch King Vangmar, of course, who was their leader. But then he also went on to mention that when the Witch King was slain in the battle, that Camul the Easterling, his lieutenant, stepped in to take his place. So there was an opportunity to create a ring wraith that had Easterling design elements in his costume.
You should have stayed dead.
They were from a great range of different backgrounds within Middle-earth. There's belief that they were Gondorian lords or Númenórean lords. One of the characters that I focused on was actually a lord of the Haradrim. So what I tried to do was tie a lot of the iconic elements from the characters that you see in Lord of the Rings, but definitely more aggressive.
With the ring wraiths, we were all having a go and throwing things in, and bizarrely it kind of worked out that almost everybody in the design room got 1 ring wraith to their credit.
When we finally see those ring wraiths, we can point out, oh, I did that one, you know, and it was quite cool. It doesn't always happen.
Nick did one, Dan did one, Andrew did the Witch King, Greg Tozer did one, and that proved to be a very successful process because what ultimately comes out of it is this ensemble cast of unique characters that all feel as one within Middle-earth but unique in their own right.
You have no power here, servant of mortal.
Depicting Sauron was difficult because you are depicting the undepictable. And generally, when you're depicting the undepictable, you don't depict much at all.
It's a strange element in Tolkien to make the guiding force of the evil powers shapeless and unseen. Not invisible, but unseen. But then, in a way, that's what Tolkien thought about the nature of evil. He keeps insisting throughout his works that evil is not creative. It is an absence. It's a negative force. And so that fits Sauron. But we have to remember that at the time The Hobbit was written, there was an enormous backstory.
Sauron is one of the Maya, one of what we would call the angelic spirits.
But there were others. Balrogs are examples of another type of Maya. The wizards were also Maya.
Sauron could appear in any guise he wanted early on. At first, Sauron likes to take the form of a beautiful figure that he used to deceive and trick the elven smiths into making the rings of power in the first place.
Each time Sauron's defeated, it sort of gets worse for him. After many defeats, he can no longer take a fair and seductive shape. He can only take an ugly shape. After his defeat in the Battle of the Last Alliance, he cannot take any shape at all.
Sauron is reduced to nothing but spirit, nothing but insubstantial malice.
For an entity, whether good or bad, to be so unbelievably powerful that they're the most powerful thing, almost godlike in their status, then the second you try to really put your finger on a design or a look or a definitive, this is who this is, it's almost always going to disappoint you. I mean, it just will. There's nothing more powerful than the imagination.
From out of the darkness, a necromancer has come.
The first Hobbit movie, we looked around, we're trying to make him some sort of a black hole or a void or a sort of a thing that sucks light in. I think it'd be interesting if we could pull off just him looking very like a black hole. It'd be good to do some concepts for what that would be like.
I threw one in there which was almost like he had a vaguely humanoid shape that was a hole in space and time, but I thought maybe on the periphery there might be anguished or screaming faces that you would get glimpses of.
And then Gus Hunter started to design an entity of smoke and light and dark and negative space where it would suck up the world around it.
It's hard because you're just ending up with a black hole, so it was one of those situations where it can look quite good in artwork, but when you execute it on film, it doesn't work. The one we ended up with, we were aiming for that and we didn't quite get there, but it didn't really matter too much because it was just the tease.
In the Desolation of Smaug, Gus did a number of illustrations where you'd see the necromancer that had these sort of tendrils coming around, almost like smoke or ink tendrils, and I think Weta Digital played around with that idea.
We're kind of down to the last couple of days of the animation on Hobbit 2, and the thing that we're trying to get working now is this epic sort of battle between Gandalf and the Necromancer in Dol Guldur, and there's all these kind of crazy tendril-y effects.
Eventually, I wanted people to know who it was to invoke the character that we knew, and the armoured figure we'd seen at the prologue of Fellowship of the Ring, as well as that flaming eye motif, were so much linked with him.
One of the ideas was that you see Sauron arrive in his armor and he inverts and becomes the pupil of the flaming eye, and so you have that connection between the two.
Overall, we wanted to have this aspect of the eye. The human form in the middle forms the cat's eye slit pupil of the eye, and then the shape of the flames form the overall form of the eye. So that's how Sauron makes his final appearance in Dol Guldur.
After the battle at Dol Guldur, something that came up in the script was this little excursion that Gandalf takes into a part of Middle-earth that we know almost nothing about, and that's the Sea of Ruin.
That came from an idea where Sauron's fled into the east. Gandalf should follow him. I mean, you know, this is his mortal enemy.
The Sea of Ruin is basically a dried up inland ocean. I was really excited. I imagined the Sea of Rune being this sort of petrified landscape. If you could imagine waves that come crashing on the shore and suddenly solidified into these sort of overhanging cliffs and all of that in the midst of a totally flat plain. So the plain would be flat and it would drop away into this really, really tortured landscape.
And then Peter wrote a scene with this kind of huge rock. Sauron would climb up with Gandalf pursuing him. And then Sauron would kind of disappear into a fissure in the rock at the end. I came up with the idea that it might have been some kind of seeing seat. A seeing seat like the one at Armenhen.
We were so excited at the mention of the Sea of Rune, and it would have been incredibly exciting. Unfortunately, Gandalf doesn't pursue Sauron.
We didn't want to weaken Gandalf's character, but then what we really ultimately began to realize is that was such a simple fix. It's just Saruman saying, "Leave Sauron to me," which in effect is what he does do in the book of The Lord of the Rings.
Go now. Leave Sauron to me.
I used this courtyard set that we built as a kind of module to help to build the rest of the digital environment. Out there beyond the green screen, there'll be other ruins and a distant view of the forest and a turbulent sky.
The skies were really important to Peter. There was a lot of research on skies and different cloud formations. The clouds from Strath-Tyree were referenced a lot in the final shots.
Our first location in the South Island that the main unit visited was Strath-Tyree. Those parts of the country do get extremes in weather, and it gets affected by these crazy winds and weather patterns coming from the north, south, east and west, which is why these places look stunning, surreal, and have these amazing skies that were coming in.
Strath-Tyree, central Otago. Incredible skies in this place. I don't know what it is. It's, wow, over there it's pretty awesome.
They were like close encounters sort of skies. It was, yes, we were about to be visited by somebody from another world. And I think Peter got some footage of them and was going to use them in the movie.
Where our skies are a little boring, we'll probably replace them with these cool skies. I'd love to do that, get some real mood into it.
In trying to build a broken-down castle, it's really good to start with a not-so-broken-down castle so you can actually understand the space and have a logical view of it and, where the towers are and how things kind of fit together.
I did make attempts to kind of work out a complete and intact version of Dol Guldur, just to make it easy for everyone to kind of build the structure, essentially.
What that allows us to do is it gives us better tools for blocking out the shapes that we're trying to get to. If we have a really nice drawing of a tower, then we can build that tower, and then, in most cases, we'll end up reusing that tower several times. Then we just do broken down versions of it, so we rip chunks of it off and open it up so it looks like it's been there for a long time.
Some sets you're building, you actually didn't know how tall or wide it was going to be or how it interacted in the global picture of it. And it was, once I got into the post world, I realised how big it was.
Every time you see a wide shot of Dol Guldur, you're not really seeing any sets. Obviously, all the wide shots, it's completely digital.
We had to make Dol Guldur look as evil and nasty as possible. It's like the cancer that sits at the heart of Middle-earth, really, and all the bad things that are happening are just emanating from this rotten core.
Go back to the boys from whence you came!
The events at Dol Guldur with the vanishing of Sauron does have a lot of echo in The Lord of the Rings.
Dol Guldur survives the end of The Hobbit, but definitely by the time of The Lord of the Rings, dark forces have returned to the tower. It's used by the Nazgul to launch attacks against Lorien, attacks against the Wood Elves.
It's a canker that sits in between two great kingdoms of elves. And it's a strong staging point for Sauron's armies. And after the War of the Ring, Galadriel is the one that breaks Dol Guldur finally.
Galadriel threw down its walls and laid bare its pits.
When all is said and done, and Dol Guldur has been cleansed by Galadriel, Celeborn and Thranduil meet and cleanse the whole northern region again.
And on the day of the new year of the elves, Celeborn and Thranduil met in the midst of the forest, and they renamed Mirkwood Erin Las Gallen, the Wood of Green Leaves.